And he was crying, and he was screaming, and he was saying, "Oh my God, what is that? We have to get out of here. Shut up, don't do that, you're going to bring it in here." This thing was up outside, and it was coming in. My name's Matt Emsch. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, and that's where this experience happened. It happened roughly in 1987. I was 14 years old. It was the summer we had just gotten out of our junior high year, so we would be going into high school as freshmen the following year. And me and three of my best friends, we two of them are not here anymore, unfortunately, but three of us, well, the four of us, I'm sorry, we would, along with other buddies, but this day there was four, we would just go all over town. Youngstown at that time was a very rough and tumble kind of place. If you look up online, we've unfortunately over the years multiple times gotten the moniker of Murder Town, USA, because of being the highest per capita murder city in America multiple times. And this was one of those times. So the reason I'm explaining that is because we would often, whenever we would go around to different areas of the city that we like to frequent, we would arm ourselves, and we wouldn't do anything bad with it, but we just brought it for protection because there was a lot of gangs at that time. The mob was even still big at that time, and places we frequented, nefarious things would happen once in a while. We never saw anything, but we were told things happened. And the one place where my experience happened was in the old steel mill area of Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio used to be one of the biggest steel producing cities in America. And when that part of the country's economic background, crumbled, Youngstown, Ohio was one of the cities that was hit really hard economically. And if you Google old steel mills of Youngstown, Ohio, and specifically Google the blast furnace area, you will see pictures of the area that this experience happened with me and my friends. And more often than not, the reason that we would bring weapons with us when we went down there is because, first of all, it was just a massive, dilapidated area, very dangerous just being down there. But there were wild dogs that frequented this area, and anybody that's in large cities or in areas that know about packs of wild dogs in cities, they're not, come here, Fido, let me pet you kind of animals. They're very dangerous. They'll kill people and have killed people. I remember there was a 3 or 4 year span during this time that there was supposedly two homeless people that were mauled by packs of animals. But at the end of this, I'll give my opinion. I'm not so sure if both of them were killed by a pack of dogs. It might have been something else. So we would go down there, and we would do what boys do. We would, just investigate the huge area. And there was one area that we would go down to from one of my friends that was with us. He lived directly across the street from the steel mill entrance that we would use. And he lived across the street from, it's called Route 422, or Youngstown Warren Road. In Youngstown. And that is, if you look at that area, it goes right across to the steel mills. There's still an active steel mill there now, to the right of where the old ones used to be. And they still utilize this railroad track where the building that we frequented and made kind of our quote unquote home base. There was a railroad track that went directly by the building right out front. And I'm sure that was, to ferry in materials to the steel mills and to ferry steel out. The building that we would go into had no stairs. So what we had to do was we would have to kind of hop up on this outer ledge that was all concrete, kind of like a, I don't know, just a big concrete area, and roll ourselves up and go in the building. And we like that because if these pack of dogs ever came by, they wouldn't be able to run up the stairs and come in there. If any people were to come down there, we would know if they were coming in. It was just a safer place, and we liked to go in this building because it was easy for us to get into. Um, we would stay down there at night. What we would do, it was an extremely large building. It was like 4 floors, and in the middle of the room, you could look up to all 4 floors. So you could look up directly and see the ceiling. Um, it was a extremely large building that had on each side, north, south, east, and west, the walls were like open. So what we wanted to do for that, because we didn't want to be seen by um, police or security from the train yard. So what we did is there were these, and I always say this, I'm gonna investigate what they were. I don't know what they were made for, but if you look at, the best way I could describe these pieces of metal, the old gladiator shields, that they had shields that were kind of U-shaped, and when the person would hold the shield, it would cover them, like their arms and shoulders. It would kind of almost wrap around them. That was the size of and the shape of these metal things, and they had hundreds of them in there. So what we did is we took these and we lined them up and stacked them as high as we could. And even though we were 14, we were all pretty big. You know, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'4", 265, and I was a big kid, and so were a couple of my buddies. And we would get them up pretty high, and that would help keep the light out, because at night we would build extremely large fires. There was no it was not hard for us to find supplies to burn. There were tons of pallets around, and things like that. And you know, the building was all made of concrete, and so when we had these fires, there was no danger of the building going up. And because the middle of the room, like I said, the ceiling was not there, you could look up to the top of the ceiling on the fourth floor. The flames never reached that high. But you know, we wanted these walls built also, so when the trains came by, we wanted to try and mask that flame so that they wouldn't call security, or more likely the police. And you know, we would have gotten in trouble, and definitely never been down there again. The night that the experience happened, you know, we went down there and we were there for a while, and it was at night, and we had built a really large fire that night. And um, I recall we were all kind of just standing there, and we weren't talking at that point. It was one of those moments that everybody's had when you have fires, that you kind of are just staring at the flames and kind of zoning out, and it's quiet. We were just staring at the flames, and all of a sudden we just heard this pack of wild dogs, and it all kind of brought us, you know, to bear. And we went out on the kind of concrete patio out there and stood to see what they were doing. And they came running by, about 6 or 7 of them, and they didn't pay us any mind, any attention. They ran right past us, and just outside of the buildings, um, there was, just past these railroad tracks, were huge piles and mounds of coke. And if anybody knows the steel making process and industry, coke is a ingredient that they use. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I mean, it basically just looks like dirt. But it's made of whatever natural material that helps them smelt the metal. And there was huge mounds of these, and it went probably, I mean, I would probably say at least a quarter mile each way from where we were. And these dogs ran just past our building, maybe 5 feet, and they made a quick left turn, and they ran across the railroad tracks and up this mound. of this coke and down. And it was only about 15, 20 feet from where we were. And they ran down the other side. And as soon as we lost sight of them, we immediately started to hear them attacking, we thought, each other. We thought they started fighting with each other. And we were, very confused as to why they would be doing that when they were just running together. But within a couple seconds, we realized that they weren't attacking each other, they were attacking someone or something else. And what happened was we started to hear whatever this was fight back, and it was a louder dog-like sound, but it was very deep, very, very loud. You could almost feel it when it made its noises and attacking sounds. And as soon as we picked up on that making its noise, we started hearing yelping. Dogs that had ran by us were obviously in pain and being attacked on themselves. And something happened next that really shocked us. What occurred was two of the pack of dogs actually came flying over this mound of coke, and they didn't jump over it themselves. They were thrown. So they came over. One was upside down, turned around with his butt facing us. Another was like on its side in the air, and they hit the ground very hard, just in front of us, and got up. One started limping away. Another one had a very bad injury. I remember we all felt really bad when we talked about it later. We don't know if it died. It might have. It had a very bad wound from its front left shoulder. It went towards the middle of its rib cage. It was bad. It was bleeding really bad, and it was crying and running away, limping away. And a couple more came thrown over the top. One hit the top of the mound, and material flew everywhere, and it rolled and got up and ran away. And not long after that, a second or two, the rest of the pack just came running over, and they all went back the way that they came. And we were in total shock and awe. And we just were staring at each other and at the animals, and we're watching the dogs run away. And we just had no idea what just happened. What is going on here? And just at that point, my one friend was to my left behind me, just behind my left shoulder. And he says, guys, what is that over there? What is that? And we all looked at the same time. When we looked to our right, and what came up to the top of this mound was, excuse me, an animal that to this day I have never seen anything that looked like it, to the size of this creature. It looked very dog-like, wolf-like, but the size was so large that I've always said this, no matter how many times that I've told this experience, is it looked fake. It didn't look real. It was one of those moments in your life that you think, okay, maybe I'm dreaming. I'm about to wake up, and it's very real, but I'm gonna wake up. Like, you realize in a dream this isn't happening, and you wake up. That didn't happen. We were really seeing it, and this thing crawls up to the top of this mound, and it was every bit bigger than the biggest polar bear I've ever seen. And we picked the polar bear because the shape of this thing was very, very much like what you see in a polar bear. And a polar bear, has a much different build than, say, a Kodiak grizzly bear. Kodiak grizzly bear, in my opinion, is basically like a walking boulder. It's just big and massive, and just wrapped around itself, and huge, but small compared to this. And when you see a polar bear, they're very long limbed, they're lanky, they're lean and large, but not built, like a grizzly bear, and that's the build that this thing had. It was, like I said, bigger than any polar bear we have ever seen on TV, and it crawled up to the top of this mound, and we're watching it, and it did not see us, and it was watching the dogs run away, and what it did. And I always preface saying this before I say what happened next. Some people might find this amusing, or wonder why that I say that this happened. It has meaning, and it was disturbing. And what it did is it lifted its leg, and it did what dogs do. Um, it started doing its business. And what was different about this, and why it was disturbing, is when it started doing its business, and it was basically like somebody had turned a hose on, and the stream hit this mound of this coke it was standing on, and pieces of it start flying everywhere in the air. And the force that was hitting this mound was scary, because it showed you again this fake kind of ungodly size of this creature that we were looking at. And it scared me, and I was taken aback by it. And my one friend that was behind me, who noticed it first, it scared him too, and he started stepping back, and he kind of tripped over himself, and he fell into that makeshift wall that I was explaining to you that we had made. And what happened was, the telltale sign of heavy metal on concrete scraping. And it was very loud and very jarring. And we all looked at him, and the creature did too. And it noticed us, and it turned its head, it snapped and looked at us. And, the blood left my body immediately. I know I must have turned white, and my buddies all did. And we froze. And the first thing that we noticed was its eyes. And, its eyes were glowing almost so bright, not almost, they were glowing so bright that it seemed like, at first maybe it was eye shine, but it was just too bright, that it seemed as though there was like a power source behind them, that it was like coming from internally from this creature. And its eyes also were just so huge, because of the massive size of this thing, that you could actually see, see the internal, structure of the eye. You could see the pupil. You could see how in every person's eyes you have the pupil inside, you have multiple circles in the eyes, and you could see that. But it was just that the lines separating the pupil from the outer circle. I don't know what that outer one is called, but you could see where it was looking, and we could tell which one of us it was looking at. I knew when it looked at me, and my buddies knew when it looked at them, and it was checking us out. And what it did next is it growled at us, and it growled, and it was so loud and so jarring that I felt it in my chest, and my whole body vibrated. And I've heard a lot of stories, and of course, since this occurred, I've been researching ever since I was a kid about these things, and about Bigfoot and other cryptids. And you hear how large cats and even alligators or crocodiles can use infrasound to cause problems with prey. And I believe that's what was going on here, because right away what occurred with me and my one friend after we talked about the event, I felt like my legs, my quadriceps, my thighs, all the way down to my ankles and feet got so weak. I liken it to when you're having a dream, somebody or something's chasing you, and you can't run, and your legs aren't working. And that's what it felt like. And I felt like I was going to go down on my knees. My legs were almost shaking. And my two friends, the one that was behind me that fell into the wall, and another one, they both said almost instantaneously I don't feel good. I feel I'm sick. I feel like I'm going to pass out. And they were kind of bent over. And what happened next was something that has changed my life forever. Has opened my mind that there is a world out there that the general public has no idea exists. They don't believe that it exists. The people out there that don't believe in Bigfoot, that don't believe in supernatural things, this thing stood up on two legs, and it immediately was like a paradigm shift. And it was the most awe-inspiring, horrifying, incredible moment I've ever had in my life, because it wasn't like a dog getting up on its hind legs for a treat, doing a trick, and they're kind of shaking, going back and forth, holding themselves up, kind of gangly. Like it was very comfortable standing on two legs. And it was even more fake looking because of the just instant doubling of its size, like a grizzly bear standing up. When they do that, it's just another level of, oh my God, look at how big it is. And this thing, like I said before, was so large that it caused me just to think I was dreaming, it was fake. Now it was in a whole nother realm. My friend that was to my left and behind me that had fallen to the wall had had enough, and he turned around and he ran in the building, and we followed suit. And what we started to do immediately is we all ran for the stairs. Now, this building, as I said before, was very old. It was dilapidated. Concrete would fall sometimes from the ceilings. The stairs going up from the first to the second floor, there was a space in between that it was maybe 4 stairs that had broken away the concrete, and all that was left was like rebar sticking out. And we had to jump that and get over it, which wasn't too hard. And we got over it, especially as fast as we were running. And if we would have fell through it, we would have got hurt. But thankfully, we never did. And that's a sign we shouldn't have been in the building ever in the first place. But again, we were 14-year-old boys. We ran up to the second floor, and we went from the second floor to the third floor. And there was a couple stairs missing, but not like the first floor. And we stopped up on the third floor. We could have gone on the fourth. I don't know why we stopped on the third. And in the middle of the room where there was no floor, or how, as I explained, you could look up and see all the different floors from the middle of the room. In the middle of the room on the second through the fourth, there was like a half wall of concrete that you could walk up to, and you could look down at each floor, whatever floor you were on to, or look up. And we could look up at the fourth floor or down to the second and first. And that's where we stayed. And my friend, who had fallen to the wall and ran in first, he basically was starting to lose it, and he was crying, and he was screaming, and he was saying, "Oh my God, what is that? We have to get out of here." And immediately we start shushing him and saying, "Shut up, don't do that. You're going to bring it in here. It's going to come in. Shut up." And he wouldn't stop. So what I ended up doing is I was standing behind him, and I grabbed him, and I cupped his mouth. I grabbed him real hard. And, I didn't mean to grab him so hard, but I grabbed him real hard and was cupping his mouth. And I didn't realize his feet were dangling. And I put him down, and I'm still holding him, and he was starting to lose air. And we all looked at him, and we're like, we'll let you go if you'll shut up. And he did yes. And I begrudgingly and slowly let my hand off his mouth. And, "You good? You got to be quiet." And he's like, "Yeah, we got to get out of here." And let's just be quiet. And just as I said, "Be quiet," we hear a thump, and you could feel it in the floor of the concrete in the building. And you could hear this noise of nails on concrete, like a dog walking on concrete. And I immediately knew that signal that this thing was up outside and it was coming in. And we all just froze and looked at the opening. And what the first thing that we saw was was the shadow of this thing. And as if you ever have a fire or a bright light and somebody is walking by it, that throws their shadow, and the shadow is 10 times bigger than whatever it is. So imagine you have something so large that it looks fake and that it doesn't seem real to you, and you see its shadow. It dominated the wall of the building, and then what comes in to sight was its head, and then the rest of it. And we got, again, we were maybe 15-20 feet from it, up, looking down at it. So we were very close. We got an extremely good look at it. It came in, and it was like, it coming in, because of its size, was almost like, that train effect of when a train is so long, it's like, when's it going to end coming in? And then finally came in, and what immediately first we saw was the color, and the color was black, very black. I at first wasn't sure if what I saw reflection, but what I saw was it seemed it had a faint white stripe that went down from the neck area all the way down to its tail and to the bottom of its tail. And it had not extremely long hair, I would say maybe. I'm starting to sweat. I'm sorry, I'm getting nervous from this. Every time I think of it, it brings me back. Its hair was maybe, I would say, an inch and a half. It wasn't extremely long or shaggy. The tail was very long. It wasn't shaggy or bushy at all. The tail was very cougar, mountain lion, Black Panther-ish. It was very thick, not long at all. It almost seemed, the hair on its tail almost seemed groomed. It was very short, very tight, like I said, like a cougar or mountain lion, super thick. And I noticed, when it was walking, when you see a big cat like a tiger walking, or a lion, you get the shoulder blades or the scapula popping up as it walks. And it was having that effect when it was walking, but it was different. It had so much mass and so much muscle around it. You could see the muscles, rippling, and each set of different muscles of however its anatomy was made up, moving as it walked. And you could see through its whole body, every muscle through the hair, because it wasn't very long. And what it was doing was it was looking around the room, and its eyes were still shining. I always say this, I was never able to see the natural color of its eyes, because, you hear stories through the years. I've done research, like I said, where people have had experiences with dogmen. And that's what this was. I had left that part out when it stood up. What we saw was for every intent and purpose a werewolf. It was mythology standing before us. It was something that was only supposed to be in movies, and it was real. It wasn't fake, and it was really in front of us. And and these stories I've heard of people having daytime experiences with these creatures in the woods, or bodies of water, or wherever. In the daytime, I've heard stories of seeing natural colored eyes of every shade that a human being has, blue to brown to green to even black. I've heard red, like their eyes were natural, no shine, just red. They were just shining this amber, orange, yellowish color. Again, it was just so bright that it just seemed, a supernatural source. And I do believe that there's something supernatural of this creature going on. And it was walking by the fire, and something happened only for 1 to 2 seconds, and I didn't get to really get a good look on it. But this is another reason why I think there's something supernatural going on. I was on Josh Turner's paranormal roundtable, and him and I compared notes, and he told me of his experience with a dog man when he was younger. And he talked about his friend that had seen it, that when it walked past a window of the house that they were in, and he had his whole family saw this thing. He said that his one cousin or friend that was with him said that as it walked by, he saw like wisps of black, almost like super black smoke coming off of it as it walked. So that gave him the impression that this thing was definitely supernatural. When it was walking by the fire, its front left, and I don't want to call it paw because it was more like a hand, and it was huge, and its hand or paw was shaped like a huge elongated raccoon hand. So if you look up what raccoons' hands look like, or if you just know what they look like, that's what its hand looked like, but just ridiculously, over exaggerated, long and huge. And I never saw the claws. You could just hear them making their clicking noise on the ground. So they had to be huge. But when its left front hand or paw hit the ground, it was right by the fire. And when it hit it, what came off of the limb was basically, if you've ever seen pictures or video of the sun, how there are magnetic storms on the surface, and you see like cyclones or wisps of magnetic storms coming off of it. That's what happened, but very, very small. And it was enough to notice for a couple seconds that it happened. And when that happened, its leg that was towards the bottom, maybe from where the elbow was down to where the bottom hand paw was, kind of just cloaked out for a second. It like went transparent, and it happened for just 2 seconds, but enough for me to notice, and my other friend noticed it too, because everybody of course compared notes. It just blinked out for a second, and it makes you think that if that happened, obviously this thing can do that with the rest of it. And it went back to normal, and I didn't give it any thought because I was staring at this thing, and it was looking around the room, and it was sniffing the air. And what was very, very disturbing was its mouth was salivating, and I'm telling you, wasn't a little. It was like huge strings that were very thick were just pouring out of this thing's mouth, and you could hear whenever the strings would break, you could hear it hitting the concrete. And it was likened to when you hear rain hitting concrete in a building. That's what it sounded like. And what disturbed me also about that situation was, if it's salivating like that, there's a reason. And the reason in my mind was it's about to kill, it's about to feed. And I started getting that innate feeling that we're about to die. And it was sniffing the air. And I'm sorry, I'm leaving out one thing. When it had stood up outside the building, what I noticed immediately about this thing was it stood up, it had dog's legs. So I've heard stories of dogmen over the years where people have said they've had human legs. They weren't human. They were bent backwards like a dog's legs are. Massive muscles in its legs. Again, just you could see the definition. You could see the separation of the leg muscles. Like in the quadriceps, you have that line that goes through the muscles in the middle of the leg or to the side. You could see the muscles through its lower leg. But when you got to the very lower leg where its paw was on the ground, you could even see the mass of the bones. I mean, it was just thick like this, like it was just like a huge limb of a tree. Its upper body was very human shaped, though. You know, I you hear stories about Sasquatch and about how huge they are, and their builds are like a bodybuilder. It wasn't built a bodybuilder small compared to what this thing was built like, and I believe that's what it is with Sasquatch too. That's just people's way of having some type of comparison. I heard a story of a police officer and his wife that were on four-wheelers looking for ginseng one summer. And I guess it was too early, but they were just looking where to come back to pick it in the fall. And they weren't paying attention. And the police officer was looking around. He said he looked down and looked up and then looked down and looked up one more time. And there was a Sasquatch standing there, and he stopped and started backing up, and his wife stopped, and he said, look, and she saw it, and she started screaming, oh my God, no, oh my God, no. And he said they left. And his description of it was the comparison he gave to the size of the thing was looking at a sheet of plywood. And anybody that goes to Home Depot or any, you know, Lowe's or anything, and you know how big sheets of plywood all are, you know, that's a great description of the overall size of these things. And he made the comment, you know, you hear about a lot of people disappearing in the parks and the missing 411. He says, I'm not saying that they're doing it. He says, but I am saying, he's like, you know, it makes you think. And it does make you think. And these things, and that's how this thing was that we were looking at. And it's just so big, it could easily, you know, dispatch a human in a second. And its anatomy, upper body wise, was very human, but again, just so overly exaggerated, just so large and muscular. It was unlike anything, you know. I as a young boy, and I still am to this day, I'm a comic book geek. I love superheroes. I always loved them as a kid, and that's the only thing I can compare this thing to is things I've seen drawn in comic books that only could, you would think, exist in a comic book in the fantasy world. But this thing was existing in front of our eyes, four of us, and that's it looked like it was drawn. Like it just was just something that was off the pages of myth and legend, and it is. And you know, you always hear stories of there's always truth to myth and legend, and I believe that now, and I believed it then, and it's true. And people can doubt my story, and they can say that he's just telling. It's not a story. These things are real. And you know, this thing was just massive. Its arms were so long that its hands went past its knees, and where the fingers, these raccoon hand looking fingers, seemed to stop was basically the top of the ankle. So it was ridiculous, like just again over exaggerated in every fashion. And the face, the head looked very wolf-like, a very long snout, not bushy at all hair. What it did have, excuse me, was, and I noticed it had these tufts of hair that came out on the side of its neck, not very far, but big enough to notice they were like spade shaped like a spade. And it always grabbed my attention, that. And very long snout, the ears sat on top of its head just like a German Shepherd. You know, when a German Shepherd, the ears snap up tight when it's looking for something and it's listening, and you can tell where it's listening because the ears would move. And that's how these things' ears were moving, almost like a satellite dish going side to side, but natural movement. We noticed the teeth when it came in the building. When it was salivating, it would every once in a while lick And you would get a sign of the teeth, and when its mouth was closed, you could see the top fangs, the top canines hanging through. So naturally, they were coming through the mouth, and the bottom ones, you could just see the tips of the bottom canines sticking up through the gums. When it licked, you could see everything, and you saw the light of the fire glinting the teeth, and they were massive. And it's sniffing the air, and within a couple seconds of sniffing the air, it snapped its head and it looked right at us. And you want to talk about blood leaving the body, about what fear does to you. I felt like I was going to lose consciousness. It was so horrifying. When it looked up at us, it knew exactly where we were, and it growled, and we got a look at all of its teeth, and it stood up again. And I mean, I started seeing stars. I felt like I was going to go out, and it growled at us, but we didn't get that infrasound effect. And we all agreed, we think, because of this half wall of concrete that we were standing by, it was in front of us, that it blocked most of that infrasound. And I'm sure some of that is why I started getting, faint, but I really think it was more fear, pure, just animalistic fear of death that was happening. And it was, what are we going to do? We're alone. We're just children. We were big kids. We were tough for our age, but we're looking at something that was made supernaturally by whatever God there is, that was created in a lab. I don't know how or where this thing was created, but it was made for one thing. It is the ultimate predator. I would not want to be around close to if this event ever happened, but I would like to see a Bigfoot someday. But I would like to also see a Bigfoot fight one of these things, because I'm not so sure, and I've never seen one. So, I'm not an expert on dogmen either. I don't know anything about them. I just know what I saw. I've tried to learn as much, and I hope my experience, being as long as it occurred, helps people.
Matt, let me ask you a question. How did this end? How did that story end? I mean, we've got the 4 boys on that 3rd level, and then Dogman down on the 1st level, I presume. And so what happened?
Yeah, I was getting there.
Okay.
So I just wanted to interject that real quick, that I would love to see, these things fight. I don't even know if a Bigfoot could handle this thing. It was so apex predator. So this thing, it stood up and it growled at us, and what it did next was, and I apologize for going off on a rant. I do that sometimes. I'm kind of like my wife says, a dog that sees a squirrel. I just snap off and go off on a tandem. It looked off at the stairs, and immediately we knew what occurred, and it was gone for the stairs, and it went back down on 4 legs. And the way that it transitioned from 4 to 2 and back was very natural. It was, I've heard stories of people that have had dogman experiences, of seeing them going from 4 legs to 2, and they've talked about hearing popping and almost like joints popping, and they didn't look comfortable doing it, and it looked comfortable, and there were no popping noises, and it was as comfortable on 2 legs as it was on 4. And the way it moved was very, it was almost beautiful, and it was like seeing a Black Panther, how they move. It's just very fluid. It was almost like it was made of oil or liquid metal, the way it moved. It was beautiful almost, and scary. And it headed for the stairs, and it jumped over that space where the 4 steps were missing, like they were an inch wide, and it ran up to the 2nd floor, and then it was looking up at us, and it looked back, and it started heading towards the staircase to come from the second floor to the third. And that's when all of us started realizing we're going to die. And I honestly started to panic, and two of my buddies, started freaking out. And the one buddy who had the most problem, hey, just lost it. He went postal. He started running in circles at first, screaming. And, there was only two ways out of the floor that we were on. It was either to run up to the fourth floor or run outside where there was a door close to where we were to a fire escape. You could run up to the top of the building on the fire escape, but the fire escape going from the second floor down had deteriorated, broken away, and was laying in a mass on the ground, and just, metal mass. So there was no way out of the fire escape. So we could only go up. You couldn't go down because it was coming up. They started running outside, because when this thing would come up from the staircase from the second to the third floor, it would be right where we were. It would be literally right where we were. And I was frozen. My other buddy was standing just behind me. He was frozen. And I started to cry. And I honestly believed that I was going to die. And I started to think we're going to watch each other. Each one of us are going to be mauled and killed, and watch our friends die. And then we'd be next. And, people talk about seeing your life flash before your eyes. I didn't see actual events flash before my eyes. I started to think of everybody in my family. I thought of my parents, and I started thinking of my brothers and sisters. There's 5 of us. And I thought of my dog. And I thought, I thought about, I wasn't gonna, live through this. And just as it started coming up, I believe there was some sort of divine intervention, because just at that moment, the sound of a train started coming. And as I described to you at the beginning, there were railroad tracks just outside of the building. And again, if you Google old Youngstown steel mills, blast furnace, you'll see the buildings. And the actual building that we were in is in a picture, and I'll send it to you. And you'll see how close the railroad tracks were. And a train was coming, and it came by. And they had to have seen the fire that we had really overbuilt that night. Because as they hit right in front of the building, they laid on their horn. And they had never done that before. They've never come by the building. In fact, one of us was coming in the building one time, and the driver saw him, and they still didn't blow any horn or anything. They blew it. So I think maybe they thought the building was on fire or whatever, but they blew it and they laid on it. And this thing stopped in the middle of the stairs, and it looked out towards the door, and it looked back towards us, and it looked back towards the door, and it went back down. And I'm telling you, this is where I also think that there's something supernatural going on here, because when it started running down the stairs, again, it was that fluid, just amazingly, almost beautiful motion of how it moved. And it got from the middle of the second flight of stairs to the first, and then all of a sudden all you saw was just like a whip, just a black kind of shadow flash, and it was gone. And I watch a lot of things about supernatural events, and I hear about shadow people and shadow beings, and how people will see them out of the corner of their eyes, and they'll just see a black flash, like a shadow. And that's what it seemed like happened. It seemed like it almost turned into like a shadow, and it just left the building in the blink of an eye. There was no way anything could leave as quick as it left. And we started immediately screaming, help us, please, somebody help us. And begging, and we're crying, and I was crying. We were all just falling apart. And the train, we thought, because it was going slow and laying on the horn, we thought it was slowing down and going to stop. It didn't. It just kept going, and as it kept going further and further away, the sounds were getting, like the axle hitting the railroad tracks, the clunk, clunk. It was getting quieter and quieter, and finally it was gone. And the fear immediately set back in that this thing was going to come back in the building and kill us. And, like I said, we had a fire going, and as the wood was burning and the popping, and every noise we heard, we thought was signaling this thing coming back in, and it didn't come back in, thank God. But we were going through a living nightmare. It was so horrifying. Every noise, every second was just the worst anxiety you could ever imagine. It was palpable. You could feel it pounding in your chest. And we were standing up on the third floor, and we were up there and stayed up there for probably 45 minutes until we went down to the second floor. And just then we remembered that we all had weapons on us, and we had 3 guns. My one buddy had a little 22 automatic handgun. My other buddy had a little pathetic 25 caliber little automatic that made its way through all of our hands through the years. You shot around and its firing pin popped out. It was a sad thing. And then I had a 38 on me that I, quote unquote, borrowed from my dad's closet. He didn't wear cowboy boots, but strangely, he had this old pair of cowboy boots in his closet. And so that drew my attention, and I went into them one day, and there was a 38 in it, and I took it. And if he would have known I did, he would have really whooped my butt. But as I said, we never shot anything. We never did anything with them. We took them down, and we remembered we had them. Glad we never remembered we had them, because none of them, including the one I had, would have done nothing to this thing except make it more angry and attack us if it would have got to us, and hurt us even worse. And I don't think we could have even thought to use them if we remembered we had them, or aim and shoot. I don't think we would have been able to do anything, but we took them out. And we took the safeties off and had them ready to fire. And we all had flashlights, but this was 87. There wasn't LED. We had the old Kmart special with the D battery flashlights that barely lit anything. And we had them out, and we were standing on the second floor, and we're talking about, we have to get out of there, and we have to go. And we made our way down maybe 20 minutes after on the second floor of the first, and we said, I said, we have to leave. It's gonna come back. It might be outside watching. We have to go. And we agreed begrudgingly that we had to leave. And my one friend who had lost it starts screaming and crying, "No, we can't leave. It's out there. It's going to kill us. Please don't go. We got to stay in here. Let's just stay in here." And I remember, grabbing him and screaming at him and saying, "Listen to me. You're either going to come with us now, or we are going to blank leave you here, and it will come back and it will kill you. So make your decision now. We're leaving, or we're going to leave you here." And he's screaming, "Matt, please, no, don't leave me. Don't leave me. We're leaving. Come now, or we're going." And he finally we turned around, and he grabbed with his one hand my shirt and grabbed my best friend. I'm not going to say his name. He grabbed his shirt, and he was holding on. It was like, choking us. And he was so horrified. And he just was holding on to us, and we left the building. And what was also scary is jumping off of that concrete kind of patio thing on the outside, because there were no stairs. Underneath, you could bend down, and you could look in, and you could see it went real far back. So this thing could have been down there. It could have been waiting for us. And that was the fear I had, that it was underneath the stair, that this concrete entranceway, and it was waiting for us. And so we jumped down and, immediately shined underneath, and it wasn't there. And it took a half an hour to get from my friend's house to this building. So we had a half an hour of nightmare fuel waiting for us. And we started and we were going quick. And, every time and we kicked the stone, we're walking on dirt and gravel. And we thought it was this thing. You were constantly looking behind us and stopping and turning around and pointing the guns and the flashlights. And we kept thinking every noise was it. And the wind, was a little windy. So the trees and whatever was making noise. And we think it's this thing coming out. And it was horrifying. And thank God we were that age, because if we were older, we probably would have had heart attacks. And I'm sure we were close to it. And we finally got to the one point where we going down into it. Once you were into the area, there were like dirt roads for, the access vehicles to drive around. But once you got to leaving it, there was basically a huge, huge hill of like gravel and material that we had to go down to get in. So going down is very easy. You kind of turn your legs sideways and walk sideways down. But going up, you had to go on all fours, because you couldn't go up walking, because you would just fall and slide down. And going up, you had to do it. And you would always, slide down on all fours. And we would always laugh at each other and make fun of each other when it would happen. So as we're about to go up and start climbing up, the fear is setting in, because, what if we lose our footing and then we're sliding down and this thing is there and it gets us? We hear this pack of wild dogs and we started freaking out because we thought it signaled this thing again. Excuse me. And they were from a distance and we never saw them, but just the sound of them freaked us out. And we started going up. And as I said, we started sliding back down, every one of us. And we start screaming, is it behind us? Is it there? And it was just a nightmare every step we took. And we finally got up to the top. And when the couple of us made it up there first, we're helping the others get up. And we ran and we had to run out to the highway, cross the highway, jump over a fence, and then run across the street to my friend's house. And when we made it there, no one was home. His parents were gone and his sister was gone, but we just sat on his porch. And I remember we got there and he had a hose there, and I turned it on and I just kept drinking water and spraying it all over myself and just staring off into the distance. And we all just drank for like a half an hour. We got sick from it. We drank so much. And we just sat on the porch and we were staring out at the steel mill, the big picture of it, just probably for 45 minutes to an hour. And we didn't say a word to each other. And for almost a week, my one friend who had lost it didn't speak. He had to go get psychological help from this. I went and I spoke to a priest from it. I'm half Lebanese. We have a Maronite Catholic church called St. Maron's in the Youngstown, Ohio area. That's where we belonged. And I went and I spoke to our priest about it, because I was having so much trouble with it. And he believed me immediately. And he told me, Matthew, there are things that we learn that are part of this world that people don't understand. And he said, they exist and most people will never see them, and they'll never break that veil and see these things. He said, and you hear the stories, I'm sure, of people being possessed. And he said, that's very real. And the church deals with those things. He said, but the church also is aware of these creatures that you witnessed, and they are real. And he said there are other things there too. And he didn't say what they were, but I'm sure he was talking about Sasquatch and some other things. And he said, the ghosts are real, and people just have to have open minds, and they will see things sometimes. And he was very understanding, and he helped. And I went for a while to speak to him about this. And we told our families about it, and we had made a pact with each other that when we went to talk to our families, just the parents, that we would all four of us be there, so that we were all there to stick up for each other, so that, when the doubt came from our parents on what we saw, all four of us were there. And You know, when it came turn for my mom and dad, my mom just didn't want to hear. You guys are crazy, and she just walked out of the room. And my dad believed we saw something, but he thought we saw a bear. He said maybe, you know, he said, I think you guys saw a black bear, because, you know, I've seen black bear before and I've seen some big ones. It wasn't a bear. And, you know, my dad said maybe it was a bear that had some kind of genetic, you know, malformity or something. It wasn't. And it was very upsetting, because I was very close to my dad. And I told him, Dad, this isn't a bear. We saw this, and told him. And he just kept saying it had to be something else. And years later, I talked to him about it when he was older. You know, my mom and dad are no longer here. I lost my dad to pancreatic cancer, and I lost my mom to complications from lupus. But I had a talk with my dad when he was first diagnosed with cancer. And I talked to him about the experience, and I told him, Dad, you know, there's something I really want to talk to you about. I said, I need to talk to you about when I was 14 and we saw that thing. And I told him the whole story again. And I said, Dad, it really happened. And, you know, we've talked about this for years, and our stories have never changed. And we've always agreed. And I'm an adult now, and I'm telling you, I'm looking at you and I'm telling you that that's what we saw. And he had opened his mind to things over the years, and he believed in much more supernatural things and Bigfoot and things. So he believed me, and that was very special to me. It was a very big event for me to happen before he left, for him to look at me and say, I believe you. Two of my other buddies, their parents didn't want to hear it. They were like my mom and said, you guys are crazy. You didn't see anything. You're full of it. And then what happened was my best friend's dad, I'm not going to say what his position was. I'm sure you could figure it out. He basically, he worked, and she was in charge of the city, and he was in charge of everything. And we told him, his mother didn't believe it either. She left the room, and he listened, and he first went off on us and yelled at us for being down there, and said, if I ever find out you guys are down there, I will make sure that you go to juvenile myself, and I'll put you there. And then secondly, he got extremely mad, more so when we told him what we saw and what came after us. And he went off, and he gave us the impression he knew what this thing was. He didn't say it, but later in the week, my best friend kept hounding him and telling him, Dad, this is what happened. And this finally, my friend told us that his dad finally broke and screamed at him and said, I know what you're talking about. Don't talk about it with anybody. We know about it. Our officers have seen it. They've gotten calls about it. He said to him, you know, we've had 2 people get killed, but he said by supposedly dogs. He says, you know, he gave him the impression that they weren't sure that these pack of wild dogs killed these 2 homeless people, that possibly one or both were killed by it. They weren't sure, but they were aware of this thing. And he made us, you know, and this is something that stuck with us for years, was, you know, he made us swear not to talk about this with our friends, because he said, you know what will happen. You tell your buddies and people at school, and everybody will want to go down there. And then the next thing that happens is there's a bunch of your friends or people are killed. You guys were lucky to get out of there. He said it too. There was divine intervention. You were lucky to live. It was going to kill you. And he said, don't ever talk about it. Don't ever tell anybody. People will make fun of you. You will be, you know, classified as crazy. They'll say you're doing drugs. He said, you know, Matt, and this is before my friend told us that he told him he knew what it was. He said, you know, Matt, you're going to play football. I was going to a Catholic school called Ursuline High School. It's a very highly ranked academic and athletic school. And I was going there to play football. And he said, you know, you're going there to play ball. You go there, they're not going to let you play. The coach isn't going to want a crazy person on his team. They're going to laugh you out of that school. You'll end up going to the city school for the rest of your life. You better not talk about it. You'll be a joke. So he put the fear of God in us to talk about that old mindset that has thankfully been being broken as the years have come by of, people don't talk about their experiences. They don't talk about these things because they'll be ridiculed. And well, this really happened. And at first, when I started sharing this experience with people, I only gave my first name. I didn't say anything about my specifics about where I lived or where. Oh, I said it was Youngstown, but I didn't say, where I went to church or where I went to school or what my last name was. And I didn't say any of that. That's broke. I've changed my mind of late, and it's because, I just turned 50 May 21st, and I've come into this realization. I've had a lot of health problems the last couple of years. Thankfully, they're over. I almost died a couple times, and that's also something that helped me come to the conclusion that I wanted to share this. And life is short, and people need to realize that those that have these experiences. Now, granted, there are some stories out there, and I call them stories because it's very obvious some of them are made up. You hear them and you kind of cringe sometimes when the stories are being told, and you're like, oh, yeah, they're making it up. And I never call anyone a liar because anything can happen. I know that for sure. But there are times when I hear them and it's just pretty obvious it's made up. But I've heard a lot of other experiences that I've heard a lot of details that are very similar to the one I had. People need to understand that not everybody who has these experiences with dogmen or / werewolf, which is what they are, it's just another term, or Sasquatch or other cryptids out there. There is a world out there that's this veil that gets broken or lifted, or we all live on this planet at kind of like a vibration, and the vibrations change, and once in a while we might enter that vibration into the other worlds that are out there, and we kind of break that veil. And I think that's what happened with us, is we were all staring at the fire and we were kind of just zoning out, and maybe we just kind of entered into something that we weren't supposed to. And I think this thing, when it saw us, was upset that we saw it. It seemed angry that we were there and that it didn't realize we were there. And I think it was trying to remove us in the worst way possible because we saw it. And these things are real, and there's a supernatural side to this world that people don't believe in, and that's people are starting to open up to, and more are starting to have experiences. And